Hello YouTube, my name is James, and today I'm going to be working on this Alienware computer. Um, the computer doesn't need a whole lot of work, it just needs a new cooling fan because one of the cooling fans has a bad bearing. And I'm also going to be installing a new SSD to give the computer a little bit of a performance boost. So let's get down to the work table and have a look. Alrighty, so here's our computer. The computer does turn on. So we're going to start by flipping it over to the underside. And there are 7 screws that need to be removed. And so we'll go ahead and take all of these out. Okay, now that we have the screws out of the bottom, we're going to gently, because we don't want to break this thing, get my prying tools here. We're going to just go around and gently lift this up. Alrighty, so there it is. I'll lift this bottom cover off and we're just going to set it to the side. No. There's that. And we're going to replace both of these fans, but I believe it's this fan that's the one that's going out. And then we have this SSD that I believe will go here in this slot. So there's a slot here, there's a slot here, and there's one here. So let me just verify, because the SSD will go in after everything is put back together. So let's see. Yep, it will go into this slot here. So I'll go ahead and put this back in its box for now. Most manufacturers will have one slot that has multiple lengths, but for this particular machine, Dell decided to give 3 individual slots for each size of M.2. So anyway, let's dig further into this machine. So we're going to take my small Phillips head screwdriver here, and we're going to take out the hard drive, because this whole bottom plate is going to have to come up in order for me to get to the cooling fans. So we'll take out the hard drive sled. Sorry about all the clearing my throat and everything. My throat's kind of dry today. Now the hard drive should lift straight out. Yep. And on this particular model, some laptops have, here, let me turn this around so you can get a better view of it. So on the hard drive, this particular model has a ribbon cable. Come on. Yeah, and they didn't give you any way to actually lift the hard drive out of the case. So this particular drive has a ribbon cable that just feeds here to the motherboard. A lot of laptops generally will have the SATA slot built into the motherboard, so it would just be here, but Dell opted to do something different with this machine. So we're going to not mess with that and just gently So you always want to work gently when you're working with computer components. You don't really want to break anything, um, especially if the intent is to put it back together again. Let me get in here. Come on. We can get this to pry up. I'd rather not use metal stuff, but sometimes metal is the only thing that'll get the job done. If you're trying to use metal screwdrivers and things like that to pry on your motherboard, you want to really be careful because you don't want to scratch the board itself. You can cause permanent damage that way. So I have the hard drive disconnected from the computer. We're going to go ahead and set that aside. And now the next thing is going to be taking out all of these screws. There's a whole bunch of them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 on the bottom side, and I believe there's a couple on the sides or on the back too that also holds everything in place. So I'm going to go ahead and take out all of these screws and I will come back to you. So yes, I was correct. There are 2 screws on the back of this. There's one screw here and there's another screw on this side. There we go. So I will take those out as well. And one other thing that I forgot to mention earlier, but it actually does say right here, I have to remove the wireless card from this computer before I can take the bottom off. And on this computer, the wireless card is located underneath this little protective flap. The wireless card is installed in an M.2 slot. So it is a different. So M.2 is a little bit confusing in a way, because M.2 refers to the actual slot itself. The purpose of M.2 can vary depending on any number of different things. Wireless cards, I will show you a little bit later on. Wireless cards use a different keying. M.2 slots are keyed so that you can't put the wrong thing in the slot other than what that slot is designed for. So because of the keying, which like I said, I will show you a little later, you have to put the wireless card in a certain spot. You can't mix it up, and you cannot put an SSD in the wireless slot. So we're going to go ahead and take this out. M.2 devices are generally held in with just a single screw on the end that will come out. And then the card itself will just lift up and don't want to lose this little plastic piece. I'll put that to the side. The card itself will lift up and pull out. M.2 slots work a lot like RAM module slots for computers. Or for laptops, I'm sorry. So like I'll show you real quick here because you can very easily see. The only difference being that an M.2 slot would have a screw at the end instead of the little catches on the side. But if you take these apart, the slot pops up, or the RAM stick pops up and then pulls out. So it would go in the exact opposite way. It would go in at an angle, and then you would just push it down. And like I said, laptop RAM slots have the latches on the side, but the RAM stick is going to be pretty much the same size. It's not going to make a difference where, you know, how much RAM is on the module or anything like that. The physical size is the same. So having the catches works for this. For M.2, the cards can be very different. So you can't really use a catch system like this. It's easier to just put a screw at the end. So like they've done here, 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 and in this particular case here. So with that said, I will continue to continue taking this thing apart. One of the other things that will have to be done to get this apart is to carefully, I can't emphasize how careful you have to be when you're working with this kind of stuff to not break things. But carefully pry this back plastic cover off, and then this front cover should be able to lift right out. So I will work on getting this apart, and I will be right back. Okay, so now that I have the back piece off, there are 3 more screws under this plastic cover, so we'll go ahead and take those out. So those screws are out, and this should just carefully lift out of here. One more thing that I have to do before this back cover can come off. These strips here on the sides are RGB lighting strips, and they're powered by connectors that are underneath these corners here. So I do have to take this screw out of here and this screw here, and that will allow me, or should allow me, to get these connectors out. At the very least, the entire module here. And then this back panel should be able to come up. Okay, so I will work on getting this off, and I will come back to you once it's off. Alrighty, so now that I have the back plate off, one of the things that I'm going to do, just for safety reasons, for my safety and for the safety of the computer, is I'm going to disconnect the battery. That will cut the power to anything that might be going on in here, which will reduce the risk of causing any kind of shocks or anything like that, electrical shock to the computer. This is one of the downsides to computers that have built-in battery packs, is you can't get to the battery pack to disconnect the power without taking the computer apart. So I'm going to find out which of these cables here is for the battery. Found it. The battery is this cable here, and it runs to this very large connector on the motherboard. So we're going to just go ahead and disconnect this. And that doesn't quite fit in there, but that would have been nice. So the battery is now disconnected. So we should be good to work on this thing. The first thing that I'm going to go to doing is going to be replacing the fans. I have a new set of fans here. Just got them in yesterday. And unfortunately, to get to the connectors on the fans, because of the way this system has been built, I have to pull the motherboard out because the fans plug in on the underside of the board. So first thing to do is to go through and disconnect all of these cables here carefully. You don't want to break them. So we'll just gently unplug all of this. So some of these connectors lift up. some of them just pull out, and then others like this little one here is going to just flip up. So instead of pulling up to lock, it just flips up. This one pulls up. And this one over here is for the real-time clock battery, so we're not going to worry about it. Well, we're not going to worry about disconnecting the battery. I will unplug this USB cable. Nope, it's not wanting to come out, so we'll just lift out. We'll just take the daughter board out. So with that said, I'm going to go through and remove all of the screws here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's screws everywhere, so we're just going to go and remove all of them, and then the motherboard should be able to just lift out. So I will get this done and we'll come back. Okay, so seems like this daughter board does not actually come out very easily. It has a little thing right here that's holding it in place. It seems to be riveted in, but the reason I couldn't pull this connector out is because it actually has a locking clip. So you would lift this clip and then the connector will come right out. So there's that. That is disconnected. Now I can take the motherboard out. Okay, so now that I have the motherboard out of the computer, and I've got it flipped over on the underside so that we can get to these fan plugs, we're going to go ahead and unplug these fans. So one here and one here. There we go, they're unplugged. And I'm going to pull out the new ones. There they are. So, like I said, only one of these fans is bad, but we're going to go ahead and replace them both just to, to replace them in pairs. So we have this one that is going to go here, and then this one that will go here. They're the same. I'm actually looking at this, and it looks like these replacement fans, I will show you once I get one of them out, are actually slightly more powerful than the factory ones that came in here. So that's a good thing. That means that the computer should be able to stay a little bit cooler even than it was before. So let's work on getting these fans out of here. So to do that, it looks like we're going to have to flip the board back over now that we have them connected or disconnected here. So we're going to just take it and flip it like so. So we're going to take a very small screwdriver, probably a 00 Phillips. So just a very small screwdriver. There we go. All right. All right. But we're going to undo this little tiny screw here. This little tiny screw here. Put these screws somewhere so that they don't get lost because they are very, very small. And then the same on this side is just this little tiny screw here. This little bitty guy here. And when I carefully lift up, the fans should pretty much just fall out. And for the most part they are, except for this one that's stuck on the tape. There we go. All right. So I'll set this back down so that I can show you what I was talking about. This is one of the old fans. This is one that we're taking out. And there we go. So the reason I can see that it's a bit more powerful is, so it is 5 volt, 4 amp, or 0.4 amp, 10.8 CFM. CFM is a measurement in how much air the fan is capable of moving. So in this particular, for this fan, the replacement fan is also 5 volt, 4 amp, but it's 12.8 CFM, so it's not going to draw any more power, which is a good thing. Being that this is a laptop, you don't want to put, you don't want to draw more power while producing a little bit better cooling performance. So there's that. And the other fan, that is the GPU fan, I believe. And then the CPU fan, again, is 5 volt 4 amp. This is the old one, 11 CFM. While the new one is 5 volts 4 amp, 12.1 CFM. So yeah, like I said, the new fans that are going in this machine should be able to keep it a little bit cooler than before without drawing any additional power. And to put these in, we're going to flip this back over carefully, just to pretty much align this up with where it's going to go. And I mean, that's it there, that's it here. And before I plug them in, I'm going to flip it back over again. So we're going to put these little bitty screws back in to put the fans in place. I'm mostly just holding the fan up so that the screw holes are up where I need them to be so that the screw can actually bite and start to go in. Okay, so the fans are actually bolted back into place or screwed back into place. So we're going to flip this over again and we're going to connect the fans back to the motherboard. So there's this connection here for the GPU side, this connection here for the CPU side. So these fans have been replaced. So the next step is to start putting everything back together. Okay, so I have the case back up here. As you can tell, I did not disconnect the antennas from the wireless module. That's more of a personal preference. There's not really a need to do so or not do so. I just chose not to do it because the antennas can be a pain in the butt to reattach. So if you can get it apart without disconnecting them, it's generally easier to do so. We will feed this Wi-Fi module up through here, just carefully. And then on this side, there's this cable that you can't see under the motherboard right now, but that will also get fed up through. We'll get that through here. And then you'll get all of these other connectors out from underneath the board. So this connector is the DC power, so that's whenever you plug the computer into charge, it's going to come through here. And then all of these connectors here are for different things like the keyboard, the mouse. This is probably speakers. This is for something else. So since we're installing, we're going to go ahead and start trying to plug everything back in. So I usually just try to start on one side of the board and work over. Makes things a little bit easier that way. You're less likely to miss something. We'll plug that in. We're not plugging the battery in yet. That's going to be the exception to the rule. So plug this in, plug this in, plug this in, plug this one. And, let's not forget this USB daughter board over here. So we'll go ahead and plug this in while we're at it and lock it down. Yeah, we'll cover it back up with the tape. So, and before I start actually putting the screws back in here, I can see that it's not quite laying flat. Part of that is because there's cables underneath this side of the board that have to be repositioned and reconnected. So we're going to hold on the motherboard here, or on the fan shrouds, to help hold the board in place, and we're going to flip it over gently. So we're going to flip this over, and I can't see what I'm doing, but I will turn it around to do most of this work. So we have 3 more cables here, 1, 2, and 3, and they're going to connect to their respective connectors. So I will again flip this around so that I can see what I'm doing and get these connected. Okay, so now that I have everything reconnected, before I actually start putting this back together, it's usually a good idea to connect the battery, because I'm going to have to do that anyway. But first, what I need to do is put the 4 screws back in that hold the fans in place. So there is one here, one over here, and the last one over here. Okay, so now that I have the fans bolted back in, I'm going to go ahead and start putting the screws back in the motherboard. So we're going to start with this back here. It had this little bracket over it and only had 1 screw on this side. And I believe that's because the other screw is coming in from the case screws. So we'll go ahead and put this screw back in. And then there's only a few other screws that need to go in here. Starting with 1 here and 2 over here. And that is all of the motherboard screws. But before we put the bottom of this back on, I'm going to flip it over, make sure, and I'm not going to flip it all the way over. I'm just going to open it up enough to get to the power button to try to turn it on, make sure that everything turns on like it's supposed to. And that's because it would really be bad to hook everything up, put everything back together, close the case, try to turn it on, only to find out that something is not working. So it's easier and generally better to do that with the computer open. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. So open this up, we'll hit the power button, watch it come on. Both of the fans spin up, and ooh, that is really quiet. So the screen is on. It says it's checking for media presence, which it's going to try to do anyway because it doesn't have a hard drive in it, but that's all right. That means that the screen is lit up correctly. Hard drive not installed. Yep. That means that the screen is hooked up. Everything is working. So we'll go ahead and reach in here and hold the power button, shut it off. There we go. So everything's off. The next step after this would be to put the bottom cover back on. But while I actually have this all apart, I was going to show you the difference in the M.2 slots. So this particular slot, or this particular card for the Wi-Fi, I will turn this around and hold it up to the camera so you can see. Because, like I said, I'm trying not to, I don't want to disconnect the antenna wires. This particular card, as you can see, has 2 different keys in it. One is an E key and one is an A key. So the slot that it goes in is this one here marked WLAN, or Wireless Local Area Network. And the particular slot is an E keyed slot. So with it being keyed both ways, E and A, this particular card can fit into a E keyed or an A keyed slot. This is an E keyed slot, so it works perfectly well for this purpose. An SSD, on the other hand, is usually either B keyed for SATA M.2 or M keyed for PCIe M.2. So this particular one is M keyed, it's not labeled. B keyed would be on the other side of the card, basically. B keyed cards are generally keyed for both B and M. So they can sometimes work in a M keyed slot, but like I was saying, B keyed are SATA type SSDs, where M keyed is PCIe. And a SATA card, B keyed card, is usually keyed with B or M. So they can work with either a B keyed or an M keyed M.2 slot. A PCIe is only keyed M, and so it will only work in a PCIe M.2 slot. It will not work in a slot that's designed for SATA cards. So with that said, let's get this thing put back together. Get the bottom plate back on it and everything, and I will come back. Okay, so now that we're back, I've got the bottom case on. I've got a couple of things that I need to hook up first. So I did mention earlier in the video that these strips here are RGB lighting. Those are powered by this little ribbon cable. There's one on each side of the case. It's very flat and almost looks like tape from above. And those connectors there's one here and there's one on this side. So we need to plug these back in. Plug one in here. Plug the other one in on this side. We're going to put this M.2 wireless card back in. So it has this little cover on it, and this little cover, I guess, is just to protect the cables. So we will leave this cover on. And like I mentioned earlier, it will get installed at an angle. So probably about a 45-degree angle. You just push it in and then push down. But we will put this cover on first before we lock it down in place. So there's that. The cover's in. We'll push down. And then there's a teeny tiny little screw that will hold this wireless card in place. So we will put it in here and just snug it down. It doesn't have to be overly tight or anything like that. Just in there. So, and I will fish these antenna wires just to kind of get them down and inside the case here. Oh yeah, just a little gentle pushing to get them in where we need them. Just because when the cover goes back on, we don't want anything in the way. So, and this is on there. The next thing we're going to do is actually install our M.2 PCIe SSD. Well, it's actually NVMe, but NVMe uses the PCIe lanes on the computer. So we will go ahead and, before we put that in, we're going to take out this little screw at the end here. So we'll go ahead and remove this little screw. So there's that little screw out of the way. We will take this again at about a 45-degree angle to push it into the slot here, and then push down, and this little screw that we took out, we're going to just put it back in. One of the differences between a PCIe / NVMe M.2 SSD versus a SATA M.2 SSD is speed. That's pretty much it, is speed. A SATA M.2 is not going to give you any speed performance over a SATA 2.5-inch drive, just because you're limited by the speed of the SATA bus. A NVMe or PCIe SSD is generally a lot faster as far as the technical side of things. So I don't know off the top of my head what those numbers actually are, but I can tell you, if you're going to go with an M.2 SSD for performance, you want an NVMe or PCIe drive. You do not want SATA. If you're going for M.2 for aesthetics, or just because maybe you're working in a type of case that space is an issue, then go with whatever you can afford. One of the benefits to a SATA M.2 versus a actual SATA drive is you don't have any extra cables. So cable management would be another small reason to go with a SATA over over NVMe. But generally, go with NVMe when you can. Anyway, so we have all of this installed. The last thing I need to do is put the hard drive back in, and I have that here. So we're going to put this hard drive in. We're going to very carefully reconnect it here. So it's in. Now we put the 4 screws back in place. So some of you might be wondering how, when you're looking at something like this where there's a whole bunch of holes and possible places for screws to go, some of you may be wondering, how do you know where the screws go? That is a very, very simple thing. Most of the time, and this even happens, this is even true of some types of, some electronics and things like that, but not all of them. But I've never seen a laptop that didn't have little markings like this one here. I'll lift this up and show you. It will focus. So you see it's upside down for the camera, but there's a marking that says like M2.5 XL8 with an arrow. So that marking is telling you not only that a screw goes there, but what type of screw is supposed to go there. So when you're putting something like this together, you want to look for those types of markings. On the motherboard itself, I didn't show you, but it's just a small little gold arrow that points and says, basically screw goes here. They don't generally have enough room around the screws to put all the details of what type of screw it's supposed to be or anything like that. But on the inside case parts, you will generally find stuff like that. On the outer case, you won't. It'll just be like just a hole. No marking, no indicator. But that's usually because by the time you get to this point where you're putting, where you're finalizing and putting the case in place, that's the only screw holes you have left. So with that said, I need to put the back piece on here, which just clips into place, and then there's the 2 screws on the back. Again, like I pointed out with the bottom case, there's no actual marker that's where the screws go, or what kind of screw. But by the time you get to this, there's nothing else. There's no other option. So we'll clip this back into place. It pretty much just clips on. So, pretty much snaps on. Same with this bottom panel. We will snap it back into place. And the bottom panel not only has the 4 screws or the 7 screws, sorry, that you can see from the outside, but it also has a whole bunch of these little plastic clips all around it. So what I try to do when I'm putting something like this back together is just line it up and maybe get a couple of the clips in, but the screws, as you put the screws in, will generally pull everything back together and it'll snap into place. So when putting it back together, I wouldn't stress too much about snapping it in, just because the screws will pull it together generally. I mean, you'll have places like here where the screws won't, just because there's nothing there to put a screw in, so you will have to clip that in place eventually. This would be easier actually to kind of work it in this way. There you go. Now the front is already, what I did is I put it in at an angle where I'm fitting the clips on the front in the slots that they will go into, so that they're already in place. Then you can put the screws in and it will help pull the rest of it together. You hear it clicking into place already. Look at that. Now this method isn't perfect. You will sometimes wind up with a couple of clips just because of their placement that will still need to be pushed in manually. But then you just pick it up and squeeze, and it should go in. Alright, that's in. We'll put the 2 screws in the back. And now that everything is together, we'll go ahead and do one final test to boot the system up. And then the only thing that I have left to do, and I'm not going to be able to get this process on camera, is to clone the drive. That was part of the point of putting the SSD in, is we're going to migrate all of the data from the hard drive over to the SSD, and that will allow the computer to be more responsive. I don't want to say faster, because faster is based on like the speed of the processor, the speed of the RAM, that kind of stuff, but it will be more responsive in the sense that programs will load faster, Windows will boot up faster, things like that. So I will get this dealt with and be back. It looks like the computer actually is booting up. As you can see, it's trying to boot, so it's found the operating system. This is before I do the migration. But it is booting up, and I will be back. Okay, so it's the following day, and I've been able to get the computer to clone. I was able to get the computer to successfully boot from the SSD, and in doing that, the computer was able to boot up much faster. Going from 30-40 second boot time to around 10 seconds to boot up. The owner of the computer has already come and picked it up, so there's nothing else that I have on this particular project. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, hit like, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.